Hello everyone, and this is Phoenix here. So today I came up with a very interesting idea for a video, or a series of videos, and that happens to be a series of some of my favorite box arts within video games. So I'm going to be taking a look at one system within each episode, and just for an example, the one that you're watching right now is going to be on the NES and Famicom. Now I have thought about making this into like a top 10 list and do it with every console, but it's kind of hard for me to narrow it down to like 10 because there's just so many box arts out there that I really like a lot. So instead of that, I just decided to make a whole new series just discussing about some of my favorite box art for each system. Now before we begin, two things I would like to say first is that, well, for one, I'm not going to mention Mario, Zelda, or Castlevania because who doesn't know the cover of those anyway? And as for the last thing, feel free to discuss some of your favorite box arts that you really like that I didn't mention here, or maybe even some of the ones I did mention here. Either way, it's all part of the fun, so now, let's begin. So the first one I want to mention here is Adventure Island. I find this cover is very pleasing to the eye, mostly because it's just so very colorful. And there's just a lot of detail, especially within the enemies. And I also have to mention that I really do like the Hudson Soft border that they have. It kind of reminds me of the one from Capcom. But Hudson Soft usually likes to change up the color scheme depending on what the game is, which I do think adds more personality to it. So not only is this a great game, but it's also just a great looking cover. So the next one we have is Arkista's Ring. Now I've never heard of this game before until recently, and I have to say, I really do like this box art. So you got some thunder in the background, then you got this big awesome looking bad guy who kind of looks like someone from the Valles games. And then you got this elf chick who kind of looks like a mix between Zelda and Valkyrie from the Valkyrie series. And I do like the art style that it's being drawn in. So there's not a whole lot else I can say since it is a pretty simple box art, but it is a very good simple box art, because there's nothing wrong with simplicity. So because of this, I now kind of want to check this game out. So now we have Bandit Kings from Ancient China. I mostly like this cover because there's just a whole lot of detail going on, mostly with the character's facial features. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but you just gotta love the guy that looks like he's about to punch a tiger in the face. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty damn badass. And while the background may not be anything special, I do think it does blend well. So personally, I really do like this one quite a bit. So next up, we're taking a look at Battle of Olympus. So you have a pretty mean looking dragon, a pretty badass looking serpent, and a pretty evil looking Cerberus. And the background is pretty cool looking too. So you have some Roman pillars, some mountains, clouds, and even a little bit of lightning at the top. And I think it just really blends well together. Also, I have to mention here is that this is also a pretty sweet game. So next up, we're taking a look at Chiller. Now this is an NES port of an arcade game that is pretty fucked up. In fact, I believe this game was actually banned from some places. Which really wouldn't surprise me considering how violent this game is, at least the arcade version. The NES version is pretty toned down. But anyways, they did do a pretty awesome job with the cover. So it's a pretty dark looking graveyard background, which is very nice. And then you have some creepy skeleton guy laughing his head off, and then you have one hiding in the corner. And then you got some skeleton hands blasting out of the grave of a jewel, which kind of reminds me of this album cover of Spinal Tap. Although that album came out way later on. But probably the most funniest thing about this cover, and I'm sure you've noticed it already, is on the gravestone it says, "Dead people are cool." I always found that to be quite funny, so at least they do have a sense of humor. So yes, this is a pretty fucked up game with a pretty awesome looking cover. So the next one we have here is Destiny of an Emperor. I guess you can say I'm a huge sucker when it comes to samurai stuff. So there's a lot of detail here, like the background, the characters, but I really like the mini army up in front. And as you can see, it's a Capcom game, and it doesn't use that old style border that they used to use, but I still think it does look fairly nice. Also, I have to say here, this is a very underrated RPG on the system. And at the bottom corner it says it comes with Mega Man stickers. That's always pretty cool that you can get extra stickers just from buying this game. So next up we have Dr. Chaos. So I have to say right off the bat, that fiend skeleton in the background is pretty awesome. And I also like the font that they used for the title. And then you got some pretty bizarre monsters in the background as well. And one thing that did amuse me is that you see that red stuff on the ground, it's actually a part of a potion, but when I first saw it, I thought it was blood. Or maybe it is blood, I'm not entirely sure, but it did get past the Nintendo guidelines back then, so it really just could be anything really. But anyways, this is a very simple cover, but I really do like it, it just feels very dark. So next up we have Dragon Quest III. But I'll just go out and say that I actually do like all the cover arts for the Dragon Quest games, even for Dragon Warrior. But I'm only going to mention one, so I decided to pick the third one since I do think this one is probably my favorite looking. So one of the reasons that I really like it so much has to do with the fact that there's a lot of characters. I always found that whenever you have a cover of a ton of characters on it, it usually shows that there's a lot of variety within the game. Some of the colors are quite nice, and of course the art style is pretty awesome. I'm pretty sure a lot of you know who did the art style for this game, and that happens to be Akira Toriyama. So that's always an awesome plus. But yes, when it comes to Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, I find the covers for all of them are great. Even if both styles are completely different from the American and the Japanese one, I still do enjoy both sides for different reasons. So the next one we have is Dudes with Attitudes. Now you're probably thinking, what the fuck are you talking about here? Okay, I have to explain here. The reason why I like this cover is because it's just so fucking stupid and crazy that I just love it. So you have this Pac-Man looking guy who has Bart Simpson hair and with sunglasses. Then you got this blue chick with pretty ridiculous hair. But I think the main focus on this cover has to be the red guy who looks pretty ridiculous. So he kinda looks like an evil pirate, and then he's just looking down on them being all like, "Yar, I'm gonna like eat your fucking faces off." I don't know, it's just really funny to me, and that's the reason why I like it. It's because it's just a funny looking cover that's very memorable. But I'm sure a lot of you guys are already aware that I like a lot of weird shit, and well, yeah, this is weird shit alright. So next up we have Faria, a world of mystery and danger. I mostly like this one for the background where you get to see like the world and it's all of its islands, but you also do get a pretty cool looking dragon and some knight fighting it. And I really do like the font that they use for Faria. I don't know why, it's just very big, bright, and colorful. So it's a very simple fantasy cover, but it is a very appealing look. So next we have Godzilla 2, War of the Monsters. Now Godzilla is something that I always liked as a kid, but this cover right here is pretty damn badass. So of course you get Godzilla, which does look pretty fucking awesome. Then you got some lightning, some building, some destruction on the ground, and I really do like the color scheme that they used. I find it all blends nicely together. But it's a shame that this game kinda sucks because this cover is actually pretty awesome. In a way, it kinda makes me wish that the two games on the NES that are Godzilla related switch covers with each other, because I actually do kinda like the first Godzilla game. Sure, it's not great, but it's at least decent. So next up we have Guardian Legend, the Famicom version. Now if you've seen the cover of this game for the North American one, it looks kinda, eh. But this one on the other hand is like, holy shit, this is awesome. So first thing I have to say here is that the amount of detail that went into the drawing of this is pretty insane. Unfortunately, I don't know who did the cover here, but man, they're very talented. But another reason why I like this cover is that it kind of reminds me of Ghost in the Shell, which is an awesome thing. Also, Cyberpunk in general is just pretty damn awesome all around. So not only did the Japanese get a way better cover than we did, but also the game itself is actually a good game, so it is worth looking into. So next up we have a game I've never even heard of before called Jesus Kyofu no Biomonster. Now when I first saw this cover randomly, I was like, holy crap, this looks awesome. So I'll say it here, the characters look pretty great. And the main guy in the front kind of looks like a futuristic version of Adol from the East series, which is a-okay in my books. And I also like what they did with the girl's hair, where it kind of looks like a space background. It's pretty interesting looking. And then in the top corner you see a mechanical demon spider thing, which looks pretty badass. In fact, I really like the amount of detail they put into that, it just looks pretty awesome. So now, I'm very curious of trying this game out. So next up we have the Crayon Conquest. And I have to say, I really like both the American and the Japanese box art. Now yeah, the girl in the front looks nothing like she does in the game, but I do think it is a pretty neat looking design, and she is drawn pretty well. And I also found that the background was pretty cool, because everything looks like it's made out of ice. Then you have two robot characters, where one is white and the other is black. And I think they both have a pretty interesting design. And then you got a flaming phoenix up the right, which is pretty awesome looking. So I really do like the amount of detail they put into it. Sure, she doesn't look anything like she does in the game, but I still think it is fairly nice looking. Now as for the Japanese one, this is also a very nice looking one, but of course for a different reason. So for one, she actually looks more accurate to the game. And then you have some guy with a cyborg arm, and then of course in the background you see the main villain, which actually does look pretty cool looking. So personally for me, I like both covers for different reasons. So this next one here is Magmax. This is another game I never played before, but it is pretty awesome. So you got a mech with a cyber sword and a shield getting blasted at by a 3-headed robot Hydra. So that right there is pretty damn epic. But I also like what they did with the background where you see all the different ships and all like the robot pterodactyls. So it's a pretty simple box art, but it just looks pretty epic for what's going on here. So next we have another simple one, and that's Metal Storm. So robots and mechs are something else that I always really like. And I really like the way how the mech looks on this cover, it's very bright and colorful. And then you have some Death Star in the background, which is pretty interesting. And I also really like the font that they used. So like I said, it's another simple cover that just looks pretty awesome. So next up we have Moon Crystal on the Famicom. This is a pretty cool platformer, I must say myself. But anyways, I really like the art style that's used here. And all the characters on the cover look pretty great. But something I find to be kind of funny with this is that this cover kind of reminds me of the cover for the first Shadow Hearts game for some reason. Obviously it's not exactly like it, but it does remind me of it in some ways. But still, not only is this a very underrated game, but it's also a nice simple cover that shows all the characters and such. So next up we have Megami Tensei Digital Devil Story on the Famicom, which is the first Shin Megami Tensei game, but before it was called Shin Megami Tensei, which is why it's called Megami Tensei. But yes, this is another very simple one, but does work very well. So I really like the way how the characters are drawn, I think it looks very nice. And the demon on the side does look pretty menacing looking. And then you have this priestess chick in the back, which I never even noticed until now. But yeah, from what I can tell, it does look fairly nice looking. But I will also mention that the one for the second game also does look pretty awesome as well. So you got some pretty cool looking demons, you got a pentagram, then you got some destruction in the background, some lightning. It's some pretty sweet stuff that goes well with the dark tone of the game. So I figured I might as well add both of them here, considering that they are both connected to each other, and not only that, but I also find both covers to look very awesome. Next up, we have Nightshade. Now this one is pretty cool looking, especially with the amount of detail that they put in with the background. But I also find it funny with the way how the guy is shaking his fist. It looks like he's about to say something like, "Damn you, Anubis." I don't know, I just think it's amusing. But I do like the darkness look of this cover since it does blend well together. So this cover definitely does add a lot of mystery to it. So next up we got a pretty big one, and that happens to be Ninja Gaiden 2. So ninjas are something else that I always found to be pretty awesome. But I really like the detail on Ryu, I also like the detail on the city, the dragon. It all works great, and I also find it to be my favorite Ninja Gaiden cover. So I'm pretty sure there's not much else I can say, since I'm willing to bet most of you have seen this cover before, but it doesn't change the fact that I still think it's awesome looking. So next up we have Puss in Boots Puro's Great Adventure. Now I do like the cover here mostly because it's very bright and colorful, and I do like the art style to it, and it has a lot going on for the sides. So you have a Mexican standoff, you have a Hydra, you have the Tower of Liberty, you got an airplane, and then you got the mysterious wolf guy. So it at least does tell you something about the game, which is nice. But like I already said, probably my favorite part of this happens to be the bright colors, since it does look very appealing look. So next up we have Star Tropics, which is just very relaxing looking. Now sure, there may not be a whole lot to the picture, but at least what is on there is very beautifully drawn. And as I said, it's very relaxing looking, and it also does make sense since you are going to different islands and such. Either way, it's a great cover to a great game. So next up, we have Time Lord. Now this is a pretty epic cover. So you have this guy wearing space armor, having a medieval sword which is just pretty over the top. Then you have this giant lizard dragon, and then you have a medieval knight riding on a horse flying through space. I mean, like, holy shit, that's great. And it is a fairly nice looking background, so I have to say, this is definitely a pretty over-the-top cover. Now unfortunately, this game is not nearly as good as the cover is, but I do think it is an alright game. Not great, but also not terrible. So next up we have Uninvited. Not only is this cover just very well done, but I also find it to be kinda creepy. So you get this skeleton witch that has eyeballs, which is just very creepy looking. But it is very nicely drawn, and then you get some ghosts, a snake in the corner which I didn't even notice. And another thing I didn't even realize is that on top of the door you actually see trolls peeking out, which is also pretty creepy. And I also like the effect that they use for the entire picture where everything looks very warped. So not only is it great looking, but it's also very creepy looking, which I think fits perfectly for the game. So this one right here is going to be the last one I'm going to mention, and that happens to be the first Valles game on the Famicom. So I have to say the background on this one is pretty freaking awesome. Just gotta love the different landscapes that they have, like the forest, the mountains, the ice, and the desert, and so on. And then you see Yuko flying in front, and I always liked her design. Now, I know I've said it before in my review of the game series on the Genesis, is that she does awfully look a lot like Minmay from Macross, which is definitely a-okay in my books because, well, Macross fucking rocks. So there's nothing much else to say about this one, but I just really love it a whole lot. So that's all I have to say about some of my favorite NES and Famicom box art, or at least those are some of the ones that I really like that I thought of. Because I'm willing to bet that there are probably some I just never seen before or some that I completely forgot about. So those are really just some of my top favorites, and I can't do it in any order since it is kind of a hard thing to do. And yes, this does also include Mario, Zelda, and Castlevania. Like I said, we already know all about those games. So before we end it here, I just gotta ask you all one more time, what are some of your favorite box art for the NES or Famicom? And as for the next episode, we're gonna be taking a look at the Sega Genesis, so stay tuned if you're interested. So with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting.